White walls. You know, outside of a line in a Billy Joel song, there's really not much to them. And that line was actually about the tires, which I guess we don't use anymore either. But at any rate, I mean, why settle for white walls? Why do we always have them? Why go into a home improvement store and you'll see hundreds of colors there from all parts of the paint spectrum? So why do we settle for white walls, the polar bear in a blizzard, so to speak? Well, let's find out a little bit more about paint this episode. Now, where do we start? Oh yeah, that's right, the intro.
The Homeowner's Handbook was made possible through North Star Comfort Services. For over 65 years, North Star has been helping make more comfortable and energy-efficient living environments for Kansas.
So, where do we start? Well, certainly not by me starting to paint something. No. I talk about things. No, in fact, let's start with what is paint? And then we'll get into fun stuff like why is white the default color for walls? So let's go back in time a little bit, take a look at the beginnings of paint.
Ugh, me caveman, me want to look at, interesting cave wall, but, needs color.
Seriously? Is this a remake of Caveman? Well, I was trying to add some levity to an otherwise possibly boring subject here, but we talk about the history of paint. The history goes back thousands of years. In fact, they found cave paintings as old as 50,000 BCE in South Africa. Well, these first paints were made of natural occurring substances, those the ancient cave dwellers could find nearby, including some rich iron dirt, give it a little bit of a red color, an ochre technically. You can even also have charcoal in some of these original paintings, or cave art maybe. It's not true painting yet, because this wasn't like a full wall decorative thing. This was more to highlight telling a story. I mentioned charcoal, and you could even imagine the first fire, and afterwards somebody picking up a piece of charcoal from that and making the first art. That'd be quite the day in human history, wouldn't it? But I digress. Anyway, so let's first talk about what is paint. So let's do a quick definition segment. So paint is comprised of its most basic form of three things: a binder, which is also called a vehicle, a pigment, and a solvent, also known as a carrier. Now, you can have other additives in it, but those three components are there in pretty much every paint. Well, what does that mean? Well, let's start with the easiest one. The pigment is the color, which is ranging from, every edge of the spectrum. That's what the pigment provides. In short, the binder is the adhesion, the pigment is the color, and the solvent is the carrier, what keeps the paint in liquid form. Which means as paint dries, the solvent is really what goes away. Well, it sounds like we may be getting close to a green corner segment here, because if we're talking about things drying in paint, we start talking about VOCs. So let's talk with the green corner first, and we'll come right back. When we talk about the green or eco-friendly parts of paint, we're really just going to discuss two main things. The first is lead. Lead paint, of course, is now a big bugaboo everyone's afraid of, but we used to use lead in a lot of our paints in our homes. There's a lot of good things that lead did with paint and interacted with it and made things more stable. It also led to shorter drying times and things like that. Unfortunately, of course, lead is toxic to people, and even worse is that lead paint chips tended to be a little bit sweet, so of course children are more than happy to grab them and gobble them up. Since 1978, the EPA and the United States overall have banned lead paint from being used in houses. That's fine and good, of course, so for every house built since then, you don't have to worry about lead paint. You may still have a disclosure, but it's essentially saying, there is no lead paint in this house, obviously, because not allowed. But of course, for those of you who live in houses built before 1978, there is a chance that lead paint was used, and the older the house, the better the chance is, really. The easiest thing to do would be to, of course, just cover up the paint. Not totally dissimilar to our advice about asbestos. You have asbestos line something, you can always cover it up, and no harm, no foul. The problem is, of course, getting things stirred up. So that is obviously choice one. Choice two, of course, you can remove it, and if you do have any renovation work going on, you will have to disturb all that paint. So you want to be very, very, and emphasis on very careful if you choose to do it yourself. The advantage to doing it yourself is you don't have to worry about any paperwork and things like that about dealing with the lead paint. But if you want to be safer and more precautionary about the process, you want to hire a professional that is EPA certified to be able to deal with lead paint. Those companies will have the proper vacuums as well as take the proper precautions when doing anything that disturbs all that lead paint. The other main thing when talking about the eco-friendliness of paint is, of course, the term we've all heard, which is VOC, which stands for volatile organic compounds. Now, VOCs are everywhere, and it's certainly a lot shorter and easier to say VOC, so we'll just keep that term. VOCs are everywhere, and then everything. There's a lot of main concerns, though, with them, particularly in the indoor setting, just because of the way airflow works. Every house is built tighter and tighter. You also have a period where VOCs are emitted off of things, and paints and carpets are the two main components that are left exposed and that you'll be dealing with and sitting in and around and living around for as long as those VOCs are being emitted. So of course you want to choose paints that are low VOC. That is very easy to do. Most paint companies do have VOC lines, and more of them are just doing away with the high VOC paint compounds anyway. If you're really concerned about it, of course, some of the better choices would be milk-based paints as well as latex paints are both pretty good choices when it comes to avoiding any kind of VOCs, but still have the durability you look for in paint. There's of course also clay paints and any kind of paint that's imaginable. But the main thing is, of course, choose those that do not have high levels of VOCs. So there's different kinds of paints with different levels of VOCs that we just discussed. Oil-based solvents have a higher level of VOCs, particularly compared to water-based solvents, often called latex paints as well, that have low to even no VOCs during their off-gassing process. They can also have a lot of natural-based paints as well, ranging from materials from chalk and linseed oil and things like that. But just because something natural doesn't mean it's going to have necessarily green qualities. You can have paint with cadmium or lead in them, which are obviously toxic to humans as well. So when it comes to what paints look like, there's a handful of ways we define them with a lot of gradations in between them. Almost like a spectrum of texture, spectrum of glossiness. Flat or matte paints are great for walls with imperfections. They don't show those things off. Color-wise, they're relatively dull, but on the other hand, they are easy to touch up, so you don't have to worry about matching shines. On the other hand, though, they're not exactly great or easy to clean. Eggshell paints are next on the gradation. They have a little bit of sheen to them and are great paints for high traffic areas. Satin paints have more sheen than eggshell, and which makes them easily cleanable, but on the other hand, they're harder to touch up, of course, and you'll see that as we go on for even shinier or glossier looks. Which leads into our next paint color, or paint texture, which is semi-gloss paints. Semi-gloss paints are really good in high humidity areas. They're very durable. Again, you have some shine issues, and you also start to get into paints that are difficult to use on imperfect surfaces. Great against humidity, not so great at hiding up flaws. This is particularly true when you get to the glossy paints. Glossy paints are mainly used for highlight colors. And again, they show anything that's wrong on the surface beneath it, pretty much no matter how many layers you put on. So to talk a little bit more about paint, we're here with Andy Frazier. Andy, what can you tell us about painting? What's kind of the first steps a person should take if they're going to go, say, paint their own home?
Well, mainly, for starters, it's the preparation. A lot of people skip corners and they don't want to do the prep work because that's the hard part. And so on basic painting, mainly is we like to sand the walls and do your base coats. If you want to just do painting, still sand the walls because a smooth wall's a lot more enjoyable than a rough wall.
Now that's to be the case if you have just sheetrock. You can just go ahead and probably just start there. But if you have existing paint up, you want to go ahead and
You still want to clean mainly around the wall plates.
Oh, okay.
Areas where hands have gotten because of oils and stuff, or contamination from kids and chocolate and whatever. Just want to make sure the walls are clean. And Normally when you're sanding, you can tell if your sandpaper gums up, you've hit something. So that's why we usually like to glance over the walls a little bit. And then in just basic painting, we always even filter the paint before we put it on. Even like a brand new gallon of paint will have little junk in it.
Oh, okay.
So we always like to filter it just because it just makes your wall smoother and cleaner looking.
How does that process work to filter? I mean, you literally just...
You just get an empty container, like a 5-gallon bucket, and you put a nylon mesh screen over the bucket. You dump it through it, and then you can take the filter and go back to the water sink or whatever and rinse it out and use it again. So, I mean, you can use it multiple times. It's a good thing to do.
So I was just picturing almost like painting for gold.
Right. After you sand, I assume the next thing is prime, correct?
You don't always
prime?
have to prime. I mean, a lot of people say, well, I need to prime the walls. If the walls are in good sound condition, you don't need to.
Okay.
If you do any like plastering or repair work, wherever that repair work is, we usually like to prime that, and it keeps the paint from flashing so that you get a true sheen with whatever paint you're using. Otherwise, it'll look really dull.
And that's what flashing is. If it looks
Yeah,
dull.
it kind of just it gives it it just gives it more of a porous look if you don't prime it.
Okay, so new construction where you've got lots of mudding and taping, you definitely would want to prime.
We prime.
But even if you're going, I always thought prime was more to kind of give you that blank slate, especially like when you're changing colors. Is that not necessarily?
It doesn't have to be. Like sometimes when you get into your really like your vivid reds and stuff like that, it's good to prime with like a gray primer, and then it gives you a better base. Otherwise, it's just sometimes you have to give it 3 and 4 coats to kill it. So sometimes the primer does work. Normally we just, if the walls are in sound condition, we just repaint them, just start repainting them.
Okay.
On the inside, then, how many layers does one generally need? Just your basic paints.
Usually on a new house, we'll do 1 coat of primer. We usually spray it and then we back roll it.
Okay.
And so it gives it the same texture, and then we'll give it another coat of finish or whatever color they want. And then usually the woodwork is installed, and then we finish the woodwork also. And then after it's all done, the tail end of the job, we give it a final coat.
Oh, okay.
So we don't have to edge in as much so it's a lot faster, and it's a neater job for cutting in. It takes a lot less time.
Okay. So some little tricks. Now, if we're going into an existing home, a lot of times we just like to see a new, fresh color. So with that, you're saying it just varies all over the board. How many coats? Just depends on.
Usually 2 on an average. Even if they say we're even just barely changing the color, and they say it's a 1 coat paint, I say it's 2.
Okay.
The second coat's always faster because it's usually your edging in is what takes the time, and rolling a wall. On an average, you can roll out a room in an hour. So it doesn't take very long to roll them out. It's just a matter of, doing your detail work and getting it all edged in.
Now, I've had times where, I'm just, rolling a wall, you get that, I think it's called the peeling, where you kind of
Orange peel?
Yeah. Now not when it's not intentional. I'm trying to get a flat, pretty, wall, and it starts to kind of peel a little bit where you're getting like the spotting. Is that the quality of paint, or is that the...
When you put paint on...
That's what I do.
when you put paint on, you've got to keep a wet edge, and you can't sit there and play with it for very long, because what happens is it starts to dry.
Okay.
And then when it starts to dry, you're just pulling it back away. So we use 18-inch rollers, so you can get it on really fast, and but you got to keep a wet edge.
And you need to leave it alone.
Leave it alone. And let it dry for at least an hour or 2, and then you can coat it again. But if you find a spot you've missed, and then you go back and hit it, you just made a mess. So you just made it rougher.
This explains a lot.
I think there's a light bulb.
Sounding familiar. Right.
We can even put one of those up there, right? Light bulb.
Yeah. Ding. What do you mean in the wet edge? You mean literally along?
It's what we like to do is when you start rolling, you keep the right edge or the left edge, whichever way you're going, keep it moving. You don't want to like take a break in the middle of a wall.
Got it.
So you can just start, I think the standard is you get, lazy person starts in the middle of the wall and then just kind of stops and like, oh, I'll come back to it.
Coffee break.
Exactly, and then you're left with like this spot here.
Yeah, a lot of times what we do is we'll edge in everything first, and then we'll come back and roll out the room. Now on some paints, if it's a higher gloss, if they wanted to shine you've got to almost edge and roll all at once because you'll get a little variation from your brush strokes than where you roll.
Yeah.
So that's one bad thing about edging it all in first. But normally if you can roll in close to the corners, you don't notice it. But you will see a difference where you brushed and where you roll because it's a different texture.
Oh, sure.
So it actually has a tendency to look like it's a different color almost.
Wow.
But it's just how the shade, it's just how the shadows hit it.
Yeah, makes
So
perfect
you
sense.
mentioned sheen. Let's talk about sheens. Like, is there a right? Is there a wrong? Is there certain contexts that you absolutely do this versus another, or is it completely just taste?
Oh, I think the high gloss sheens are kind of out. I think they're more for industrial. I mean, which is great, but for residential, we try to use a matte or a eggshell sheen.
Okay.
Anything over that, the more shine there is, the more flaws you see.
Okay.
So in walls, if you have some imperfections, then you really want to do a lower sheen.
Okay.
So, and that's where flat paints are really nice, but the only bad thing about flat paints is they mar and they're not as scrubbable. So in a
Right.
bathroom, hallways, you're gonna find scratch marks on them and you can't wash it as well as your eggshell sheens.
Okay.
So,
Now, is it true? Haven't they started kind of, I guess, working on that a little bit and come out with some that look like a matte but have more of the qualities of an eggshell?
I still haven't seen one that I really think
That truly works.
It's
It's really stick with the eggshell, like with kids or
Yeah.
pets, things
Well,
like that.
your flat paints are actually a flat paint, and when you get it wet, the water goes in it. When you do your eggshells and your satin sheens, it's actually an enamel, and so the water doesn't penetrate it. It stays on top, and that's what gives you where you can actually wash it a little more easier.
Okay.
So we've tried the matte washable finishes, and I haven't found one yet that really
That
works.
really does.
Yeah.
As far as sheen goes, base case, like all the trim work and stuff, don't you normally apply more of a sheen on that?
Yes,
So-
usually on the woodwork, we'll go to a satin,
Okay.
sometimes a semi-gloss, but a lot of our new houses on woodwork, we're using a dull rub, which is a real elegant, soft, old world sheen that's still it just has a richer look.
Okay.
Because sometimes when you get into your really high sheens, it almost looks like there's plastic on the wood, and people don't necessarily like that plastic look.
Not anymore than they like plastic on their couches, I think.
Yeah.
I'm backtrack a little bit here, and then we'll go forward to, I think, a
Okay.
good one here. But, so wallpaper, paint over it, take it down.
Normally we remove it unless it's on there so good you can't get it off.
Okay.
Then normally what we would do is use an oil-based primer and coat over the wallpaper.
Okay.
And then we would take like a trowel with some joint compound and actually skim coat over the seams.
Oh, that makes sense.
And then then your base is pretty much the same that way. Otherwise you'll see the lines in the wallpaper.
So I was visualizing, that's why I thought
Yeah.
I'd ask. And to move forward a little bit though, we mentioned about, different textures being, some absorb the water, some don't. What's the best way to clean? Say, I don't know, handprints along the walls for those of us that have children in the house, or
crown drawings on the walls.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Some of those.
Well, for the most part, ammonia water works real good.
Okay.
There's a product called TSP. It's trisodium phosphate, which is a real good cleaner, and it takes off oils and stuff. I've had oil-based paint on my skin and didn't have any mineral spirits to take it off. So I just got some vegetable oil
Yeah.
and rub my hands with it, and it'll break it down because it's an oil product. So it's not as toxic to your skin.
Sure.
So it's a little safer. It takes a little longer to get it off, but it does work.
So we kind of talked about some of the basic paints. Let's talk about some of the more fun ones then, some of the faux finishes and things like that. What is a faux finish? Let's start with the basics.
It's just really just a fake. Faux is a fake way of something that looks like leather or like old world plasters and stuff, where you want that aged look, a lot of it's done with glazes. And depending on what look you want, what color of glaze, how much you put on, how much you take off, it's really subjective.
And looking around this room here, faux finishes, it's not just for that accent wall, or, I mean, we can, it goes from ceilings to tile to cabinetry. I mean, the options are really endless.
Yeah, you can really, you can make a house look, if you like that older look, then it's unlimited. It just depends on how much time you have. I'd a budget.
Right.
You can start on a wall, and the hardest thing to do is to stay focused, because when you start something, when you get to when you're at the end of the wall, are you doing it the same way? Okay.
So there's all sorts of great specific stuff about faux finishing in here that I think we should take a look at and maybe get a little more insight on how you made them. Is that all right?
That's fine with me. Let's go look at them.
All right, sounds great. Thanks.
Okay.
So let's start with this door. I mean, first of all, it's just really impressive and a great example of what you can do to wood and to anything and everything. You can do something interesting too. But I mean, there's texture on it. And how did you get this to get done?
This is just a basic metal door that we did a primer on it, and so then the plaster would stick. And obviously we sanded it and cleaned it first.
Sure.
But we use a lightweight joint compound, and we add almost a gallon of sand, which is mason sand, to 3.5 gallons of joint compound. Then we whip it up, and so then we put that on, and then this is called glumping. And so we do this base layer here, and then you can actually scoop up your mud and kind of actually almost throw it on the wall, and it just kind of moves out. And then obviously after that dries, we take wet rags to it, and then the sand that's in the texture gets exposed.
Sure.
After that, we will give it a coat of clear finish. And the reason we give it clear finish is because if we just go to it with a glaze, it just goes in and darkens the texture. So this gives it a clear coat, and then we come over with the colored glaze and then leave it in the crevices to highlight it. And then when that's all done, then we give it another coat of finish.
This sounds like a lot of work. At this point, this is where I bring in the professional, right?
It is a lot of work, but it's really fulfilling when you get done with it.
All right, thank you, Andy, for talking
Thank
about
you.
us about paint and all the fun things we can do. It's been fun.
Thank
so
you.
much.
You bet.
We should also mention there are some paint failure issues that do happen and maybe under warranties for newer paints, or just may see it in your home right now. First, there's issues with the paint itself. There's dilution and contamination issues that happen maybe at the point of origin. Maybe you leave it open too long and something gets in it. Those things can certainly happen. Then there's blistering and peeling issues, sometimes due to improper surface treatment, and other times due to excessive exposure to sunlight. Sometimes that's just unavoidable, and certain areas will require more repainting than others. Chalking can happen to paint sometimes as well, which looks like the powderification, which is probably not a word, of the paint. And finally, of course, you can also have cracking issues right there. That can happen due to uneven expansion and contraction of the different paint layers. So how do we avoid these kinds of issues? Well, what we want to do is use good quality paint. Just your cheapest kind, of course, is going to be more likely to fail. I mean, heck, Consumer Reports even ranks paints based on a lot of different categories, as Consumer Reports does. So if you're wanting to quality or double check your quality of your new paint you're looking at, make sure to stop by there. Of course, if you're doing it yourself, you want to make sure you use primer and enough coats to get the color and the look and the durability and textures that you want. Finally, if you're using a professional, you need to make sure they're actually professional. A true professional would use good paint. They don't want to come back and have you disparage their work while you're gone. So how do you find out the professionalism? Well, ask them about their paints. Ask them how long they've been doing it, and ask them what they use. If they can't tell you some of the basics, or can't tell you how the different paints look or stack up next to each other, you should probably find another professional. So that wraps up another episode of the Homeowner's Handbook. Oh, that's right. Thank you. I never answered the question. Why are walls white? Well, walls are white because honestly, it goes with everything. Not only that, it's a great way to make a small room seem bigger because of how the light bounces off of the white coloring. There's also the matter of when we first started having sheetrock walls, it was, in comparison to wood walls, so obviously it was more of an upper class thing. And not only that, but you also have sheetrock, which is, in most cases, a white color as well. That will do it for our episode of Paint here on the Homeowner's Handbook. I'm Jeff Boone. I'll see you guys next time. Now, where did I put that?
The Homeowner's Handbook was made possible through North Star Comfort Services. For over 65 years, North Star has been helping make more comfortable and energy-efficient living environments for Kansans. For future show ideas or feedback about this episode, please feel free to contact the Homeowner's Handbook. Next time on the Homeowner's Handbook, we'll be discussing insulation, including a tour of how fiberglass insulation is made. All reasonable efforts have been made to make the information in this program accurate and up to date. Any errors or omissions are unintended and may be addressed in future programs.
Is that the technical
No
term?
houses have been harmed in the making of this program.
Okay, a drill. A drill with a battle bit.